Hello everyone and welcome to the Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris, coming to you from on board our autumn retreat at sea, trekking along the New England coast and focusing on the very beginnings of Catholicism here in what is now the United States. There really are two geographical centers of Catholic introduction into the New World. One was the Deep South, meaning the Gulf Coast area and extending further south into the Caribbean, Mexico, and so forth. Of course, that went along the western route and up into California, so all of that's Spanish. Then there is the Atlantic seaboard area. What may perhaps be a little note that many Catholics don't know is neither area was especially Catholic in the way we might first think of it. For example, almost 200 years after Columbus landed in the modern-day Bahamas in 1492, when he sailed the ocean blue, the Catholic population of the New World was very tiny. And especially in the English colonies, with their noted hatred for Catholics, the population was beyond meager in terms of numbers. For example, by the time the War of Independence broke out in 1776, the sum total of all Catholics in all the colonies combined was about 30,000, compared to going on 3 million largely Protestants. Less than 1%. Catholics were about 1% of that population. During the pre-revolution days, religious and political wars were being fought all over Europe as the fallout from the 16th century Protestant revolt continued to echo across the continent. Much of that had spilled over to the New World as well, as the Catholic French and the English Protestants duked it out in various battles. The problem for Catholics boiled down to a numbers game. There simply were not enough. While the age of discovery was fueled by Catholic monarchs and Catholic explorers, Isabella and Ferdinand and Columbus, of course, come to mind, in the end it was the English Protestants who cashed in on it. Being first doesn't matter if you don't push your advantage. And they were able to cash in for two major reasons, the Protestants. First, owing to the desire to leave England and get away from the English church, which for them was still too Catholic, their numbers here began to swell. The Mayflower may have been the first, and its passengers barely surviving, but it was by no means the last. Whatever their motive, it was English Protestants who poured into North America overwhelming numbers of Catholics between 1607 and 1776. And they did not hold any regard for Catholics who they saw as the mortal enemy. The New England colonies had established churches, for example, which were Congregationalist. Those northern colonies are Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and eventually Maine, which was brought into them. They each had laws officially on the books that Catholics could not vote, and the papist religion would not be tolerated inside their borders. The middle colonies, comprised of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, did not have established churches, but that didn't stop New York and New Jersey from having some of the most anti-Catholic laws on the books in all of the colonies. Pennsylvania, to a lesser degree Delaware, did demonstrate some level of religious tolerance, but even there, it wasn't pretty for the day-to-day life of a handful of Catholics who took up residence there. And then the southern colonies of Maryland, Virginia, Carolina, and Georgia also all had established churches, this time the Church of England, as the state religion. Only in Maryland was there breathing space for Catholics. Maryland was founded in 1634 as a colony by Lord Baltimore, specifically for Catholics in England who were seeking refuge from persecution by the realm. So religious tolerance was granted, but it was a tolerance that permitted huge numbers of Protestants to flow in. Eventually, they captured the House of Delegates in 1649, and tolerance for Catholics was brought to an end. Catholics were despised, persecuted, and had laws erected against them in the colonial days. For example, in Virginia, if a Catholic sought public office, he could be arrested, charged, and fined, get this, 1,000 pounds of tobacco. In Maryland, it was illegal for a couple to be married by a Catholic priest. And so the list goes on, up and down the colonies. In 11 of the 13 original colonies, Catholics were legally maltreated. And on a point of order here, it was not largely owing to dogma and doctrinal differences. It was the idea that the Pope was a sovereign ruler as well, and that they believed he would try to extend his rule to them here in the colonies. Colonial Catholics were viewed as secret ambassadors of that sinister plot, and the English colonists were having none of it, nipping Catholics and their popish loyalties in the bud before they could undermine the colonies was job one. So as we sail up and down the New England coast here on this retreat at sea, and briefly into Canadian waters where the Protestant English really mixed it up with the French Catholics, it's good for Catholics to take stock and remember the roots of America as they existed in the pre-revolution colonies. And one final point to drive that home, the public school system was established in the colonies for one purpose: to teach children how to read the Bible on their own and not look to any authority to interpret it, especially a Roman one. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.